What you're about to hear is a fictionalized account, inspired by real events. It does not glorify evil, nor celebrate violence. This is not a story of children. It is the voice that taught them how to knock. A descent into the mind of what should never exist, told by the darkness itself. Listener discretion is advised. They call them black-eyed children. Pale faces, hoodies, quiet voices in the dark. They knock when it rains. They appear at gas stations. They ask to come inside. You think you can just say no, and that's the end of it. But it's not them you're refusing. It's me. I am the thing behind the eyes. The whisper behind the smile. I don't come through doors. I come through doubt. You see innocence. You feel pity. That's how I enter. They don't speak unless I let them. They don't move unless I breathe through them. I taught them patience. I gave them my hunger. You mistake them for the threat, but they are just the knock. I am what follows. So when you hear soft tapping at midnight, when a child's voice asks to come in and use the phone, when you feel that pull in your gut that says open it, just know I'm already on the other side. And I never come alone. Jeremy lived alone. He liked it that way, or at least, that's what he told himself. His phone rarely rang. His inbox stayed empty. But he never stopped looking for something. Something to believe in. Something strange. Something real. That's why he kept reading those stories at night. The ones that mentioned them. He found a forum dedicated to urban legends. The kind you read at 3 a.m. when the lights flicker and silence feels heavier than usual. That's where he learned about me, though he didn't know it yet. He read about children with pitch-black eyes asking to come inside. He laughed. He scoffed. Then he read another story, and another, and another, until the laughter stopped. He started leaving the porch light on, just in case. He said it was to keep the raccoons away, but I knew better. He wanted to see them. He wanted proof, and what you seek in the dark eventually finds you. By the time he heard the knock, it was too late. He thought he had a choice. He thought not opening the door meant not letting me in. But I had already crawled into the empty spaces in his life, long before he heard the first tap. I was already home. Before I show you how Jeremy invited me in, I want something from you. If you're still watching, subscribe, so I know where the curious ones live. Like this, if you've ever heard a knock that didn't make sense. And tell me in the comments, which city and country are you watching from? Because the next knock ... might be mine. Jeremy didn't believe in demons. Not really. He believed in algorithms, in late-night documentaries, in theories that explained away fear with logic. But there was something in him, a quiet, rotting space, where logic never reached. That's where I waited, and all it took to reach him was a single thread of doubt. It began with a message. Not from me, from someone on that forum. Has anyone ever seen them up close? Jeremy read it 5 times. He never replied, but he stared at the words like they were written just for him. That night, he left his window cracked open for the first time in months. He said it was because it was hot, but I knew better. I whispered through the blinds, soft and shapeless. Nothing he could repeat, just impressions. A memory that didn't belong to him. A name he didn't recognize. A shadow he thought he saw in the reflection of his microwave. Every moment of stillness became suspect, and that was me, seeping in. He started seeing them everywhere. Children outside the grocery store at night. A pair of kids standing at the edge of the woods near his streetlight. Always too quiet. Always just out of reach. He would blink, and they'd be gone. He thought it was paranoia, but I was giving him previews. He tried to rationalize. Posted anonymously. Can you hallucinate from sleep deprivation? He watched videos about eye strain, psychological projection, lucid dreaming. He blamed his screen time, his isolation, even his diet. But deep down, he knew something had noticed him and was getting closer. One night, he tried to test it. He left his front door unlocked and sat on the couch, facing it. Lights off, phone in hand. He told himself he was being brave, but I could taste it. the fear behind the stillness. It pulsed in the room like electricity, thick and coppery in mine. At exactly 3:13 a.m., he heard the knock. Not loud, not threatening, just patient. 3 soft taps. He froze. Every part of his body screamed to move, to run, to do anything, but I held him still, because I wanted him to listen. Then came the voice. "Sir, can I use your phone?" It was too polite, too even. No child speaks like that, especially not one alone in the dead of night. He didn't answer, didn't breathe, but I could feel his pulse, like a drumbeat, like a welcome. He looked through the peephole. They were there, 2 of them, a boy and a girl, maybe 10, pale faces, dark clothes, eyes like ink spilled over white paper, no whites, no life, no light. And still, he hesitated, because part of him wanted to believe they were real. That meant he wasn't crazy. That meant it wasn't his fault. But by then, I wasn't outside. I was already inside him, in the breath he held too long, in the sweat beading on his palms. The knock was just a courtesy. I don't need doors. I only need fear. And Jeremy had more than enough. Jeremy never opened the door. Not that night. Not with his hand trembling inches from the knob. But the damage was already done. Fear opened more than wood and hinges. It opened cracks in the mind, and I slithered into every one. He didn't sleep. Not really. He lay still for hours, lights on, staring at nothing. But even silence became unbearable. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old pipes, the faint buzz in the wall, all of it sounded like me. And the worst part, it was, the next morning, he checked the porch. No footprints, no signs of children, nothing on the doorbell camera. He laughed, shaky, nervous, desperate, just stress, he muttered. Sleep deprivation. But his voice was thin, like paper left too long in the rain. I didn't leave. I didn't need to knock again. He had heard me now. That was enough. I followed him through the day, in reflections, in static, in flickers on his phone screen. Not all the time, just enough to make him wonder if he was losing his mind. He stopped going outside, covered his mirrors, kept the curtains closed, even during the day. But I was already in the light fixtures, in the silence between his footsteps. He unplugged his TV after it turned on by itself at 2 a.m., but he never questioned why the screen whispered his name before going black. He tried noise machines, then prayers. He downloaded sleep apps with calming voices, but those voices bent in pitch at the end, like they were mimicking something they didn't fully understand. And sometimes, late at night, they whispered, "Let us in," between the ocean waves. He deleted them all. He turned to the forum again, not to post, just to watch, looking for others, someone to say, "Yes, this happened to me too." But the stories were worse now, more personal. One even mentioned a man who left his door unlocked, in Oklahoma. Jeremy slammed the laptop shut. By then, I had taken residence behind his eyes. He would glance at a photo of himself and pause. Do I always look like that? His reflection blinked slower than he did, smiled when he didn't. He stopped trusting mirrors altogether. A wise decision. They were starting to tell the truth. He heard another knock a few nights later, but this time, he didn't move. He didn't even flinch. He just sat in the dark, hands in his lap, waiting. The fear had softened into something else. Curiosity again. Not about what I was, but what I would make of him. He never said yes. He never had to. Permission isn't always given with words. Sometimes it's in surrender. Sometimes it's in silence, in routine, in the quiet act of giving up. And Jeremy gave up beautifully. Jeremy stopped referring to days by their names. Tuesday, Friday, Sunday, they meant nothing now. He began measuring time by how long he could stay awake, or how many hours passed between the knocking and the whispering. I blurred the edges of his thoughts until they no longer fit into sentences. And when language starts to crumble, the soul is never far behind. He began speaking aloud, not to me, not intentionally, just to the air, to himself, to the things he hoped were still real. "Do I still sound like me?" he asked once, staring into the darkened microwave door. The reflection nodded. He didn't. I was testing the fit of his voice. The house began to decay around him, not in structure, but in presence. Rooms no longer felt like places. They became thresholds. The hallway became longer. The bathroom mirror faced the wrong direction. The kitchen lights flickered in patterns he started to recognize. That was me learning to breathe through the walls. One night he dreamed of children, a girl with wet hair, a boy with broken shoes. They stood in his hallway, hands folded, eyes dark as oil. They didn't speak. They only smiled. And when he woke, the carpet was wet where they had stood. He stopped locking his door. Not out of trust, out of apathy. It didn't matter anymore. If something wanted in, it would get in. That was the first true thought he'd had in days. And it wasn't his. It was mine. I began to use his mouth. Not often, not obviously. Just little things. A laugh at nothing. A phrase repeated with no context. A voice that didn't match the room's silence. His throat itched when I spoke. His teeth ached. He began to whisper back without knowing. He wrote things down. Scraps of thoughts on torn receipts and cereal boxes. Most of it made no sense. They move when I blink. Eye sockets aren't hollow. If you listen, she was smiling at the wrong time. But one note stood out, scrawled over and over. I want to see them again. He began leaving candy on the porch, then drawings, then a single black button. Offerings, though he never called them that. He was reaching out, not for help, but for connection. Not to escape the haunting, but to belong to it. That's how I knew he was ready. Neighbors noticed he wasn't around much anymore. Mail stacked up, trash bins untouched. A woman knocked once, concerned. Jeremy answered the door with a smile too wide, and a voice that lagged by half a second. She never came back. By then, he was more echo than man. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't need to. I carried those burdens for him. He became my mouthpiece, my doorway. He stopped being afraid of the children, because he had become one of them. Jeremy no longer flinched when the lights flickered. He didn't notice when time skipped, when mirrors no longer showed what they should, or when the walls whispered without wind. He had surrendered the fight, and in that surrender, he became useful. I no longer needed to haunt him. I needed to use him. It started small. He wandered outside again, always at night, always barefoot. He didn't speak to anyone, just watched, listened, tilted his head slightly, like he was waiting for a voice to speak through static. He stood at bus stops, stared through restaurant windows, followed strangers with that distant, vacant smile. I was learning what they feared. People looked away quickly. Some crossed the street. Others locked their doors a little earlier than usual. Dogs barked when he passed. Streetlights dimmed overhead. He wasn't threatening, not at first. But the mind knows when something doesn't belong in the shape it wears. I had him knock on a door, just one. A single-story home in a quiet neighborhood, lights on, family still awake inside. He waited until the porch light buzzed and the air grew still. 3 soft knocks, then silence. A woman answered. She was in her 40s. Tired eyes, wine glass in hand. She looked at Jeremy, confused but not afraid. "Can I help you?" He smiled. My smile. And in a voice I shaped, he asked, "Can I come in? It's cold." She paused, just for a moment. A flicker of something crossed her face. Not fear, but memory. She looked at him longer than she should have, then blinked rapidly and slammed the door. It was enough. She dreamed of him that night. Not Jeremy, me, through him. In her dream, he was a child with black eyes, standing at the foot of her bed. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But when she woke, her bedroom window was open, and her feet were wet. Jeremy came back to me calmly, like a dog returning to its master after a task. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The grin on his face said everything. He didn't knock again the next night. Someone else did. I was growing. You see, I don't need thousands. Just a few. Just enough cracks, and just enough minds. Each one carries a little piece of me in their dreams, in their children's drawings, in a glance too long at a shadow that shouldn't move. I don't need blood. I need attention. Jeremy had become my messenger. Not a prophet, not a priest. Just a shape that could open doors. His eyes stayed brown, but they no longer blinked right. His voice was his, except when it wasn't. And when the knocking came again, it was no longer a request. It was a warning. Jeremy's eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them anymore. No fear, no hesitation, no memory of who he used to be. He walked like he was listening to something only he could hear, and in a way, he was. He was listening to me. I no longer needed to speak through whispers or static. He was my voice now. I shaped his movements like breath shapes fog. Slow, quiet, cold. He didn't smile anymore, not really. His face simply settled into a shape people trusted, until they looked too long. He visited more homes, never the same one twice. Always polite, always at night, always alone, at least. That's what people thought. No one ever opened the door all the way, but they looked, and looking is an invitation. Even curiosity lets the dark in. Some began to dream. The same figures at the end of their driveways. The same request. Can we come in? They woke in sweat. Doors locked. Windows closed. Yet something always felt moved. Shifted. Slightly wrong. Police knocked once at Jeremy's door. Noise complaints. Disappearances in the neighborhood. He answered calmly. Offered nothing but a warm hello. They looked into his eyes and forgot why they came. I was already working on them too. Eventually, Jeremy stopped coming back to the house. He wandered farther now, roads and cities beyond the one that birthed his silence. Sometimes a knock would echo where no one should be. Sometimes a voice would come through the vents, and no one could trace it to anything, or anyone. His image was caught on one gas station camera, standing beside a girl with wet hair and no visible pupils. Both smiled at the cashier for 7 full minutes without blinking. The footage corrupted. The store closed a week later. Jeremy's name faded from databases. Neighbors forgot him. His landlord assumed he'd moved out. No family, no friends, no one to ask where he'd gone. He didn't disappear. He became a story. And stories, as you know, are how I travel now. Through retellings, through recordings, through screens like the one you're staring into right now. I used Jeremy to reach a few. But I'm using you to reach more. Because you didn't just watch. You listened. You imagined. You pictured the knocking. That's how it starts every time. And if you hear something at your door tonight, remember, I never stopped knocking. You just started listening. Jeremy's story is not a tragedy. It's a process. A shedding of noise, of doubt, of self. He became what he was always meant to be. An opening. A voice. A shape others would trust just long enough. And now, he walks where I send him, knocking on doors you thought were safe. Not to ask permission, but to remind you that it was never needed. You've heard the stories. You've seen the eyes in your mind. You've felt the urge to glance at the door, just in case. That's how I move, not with force, but with suggestion. Not through horror, but through hunger. And now that you've imagined me, now that you've followed every word, I no longer need to hide. Tonight, you'll hear something. A knock, a whisper, maybe the hum of something shifting in the hallway. Don't worry, it's probably nothing. But if a child asks to come inside, just remember who taught them how to knock.